house needs painting, the grass needs mowing. Where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Kick us off, Sarah.
All right. Welcome to Off the Water with Hank Parker. I'm your co-host, SaraBeth, and you are?
I am Hank Parker. How about that? Let me see that hat you got on there.
I
You got
know.
a bass on your hat.
I do. It's mossy
Little
oak.
mossy oak and a bass. Man, I like that. Mossy oak and a bass. They kind of like mossy oak fishing right there.
I do. I found this hat in a Harrison's, and I had to have it because I love green leaf. That's my favorite camo print.
You're looking good, man. That's awesome. Well, let me tell you what I've been doing this morning, SaraBeth. I've been with the planning group from Emmaus Road Partners. We do a fundraiser every year for Cleve McClary, who is an evangelist who was wounded in Vietnam, has one arm and one eye. For Tim Lee, who is an evangelist from Vietnam era. He lost his legs in Vietnam. And we work with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes who distribute Bibles all over the world. They're second only to the Gideons in circulating Bibles worldwide. And so we've been on that planning. We do a Hank Parker sporting clay shoot at Meadowwoods Plantation in Waxhaw, North Carolina in March. I'll give you more information. So if you live anywhere around the Carolinas, we'd love to have you participate in that fundraising effort. We raise a lot of money for an extremely worthy cause to further the gospel. And would love to have you participate. I'll be there for 2 days. We'll be shooting sporting clays, and it's going to be fun time. So that's what I've been doing all morning.
That's pretty awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time. Like everybody, come join us.
All right, that sounds awesome. Well, you want to jump right into the Q&A?
Right into the question and answers. You know, sometimes I dread these questions because they get pretty tough. And, you know, with fact check and Google, you can't just talk your way out of something. You got to be correct. So the hot seat is on. So I guess if you're ready to start shooting at me, I'm ready to start trying to answer. Do we need to tell them about the Mercury giveaway where they can repower their boat? We're going to save that for last.
I was gonna save it for last, so maybe.
Okay,
make sure
let's
you
save
tune
it for
in
last.
the,
I think that's good.
Okay, all right. Starting with question number 1, it's on catch and release versus keeping your catch. Do you think that catch and release fishing is always the best practice, or are there times when keeping your catch is more responsible?
Well, first of all, when you're on public water, I'm all about catch and release because I do believe that we deplete our resources by keeping fish. There's so much pressure on our lakes. When we're fishing in private water, harvest is very, very, very important. So there's a time for catch and release, and I think that time is in public waters. And there's a time to keep fish, and I think that's when you're fishing in private waters to keep things balanced. So
Right. So just know the ecosystem of the lake you're fishing in if it's private.
That's right. You know, Ray Scott, when he started Bass Angler Sportsman Society, in the first tournaments they had, they would kill all their fish. There were no live wells. Ranger Boats and Forest Wood developed the first live well for bass boats that circulated from all the research that I've ever done. If somebody had one before then, I don't know about it. But they put live wells in, and then they mandated to keep your fish alive. If you didn't keep your fish alive, you got a penalty. And so there was an organization that talked about delayed mortality. And they said it's all for show. When you put these fish in a live well, you traumatize them. You take away some of their oxygen and their ability to maintain the depth of water because the live well's only got maybe 3 foot of water in it at the most. So they were saying you mess up the equilibrium, you mess up their breathing, and even though you keep them alive, you bring them to the weigh-in, you put them on the scales, and you release them, delayed mortality takes place, and these fish all die within a month from the time they're released. Well, I don't know. I don't want to put words in Ray's mouth. Ray is passed on and gone, but I think it really made Ray angry. That's my speculation. Let me state that. But Ray went to a lot of trouble. I think the University of Tennessee, University of Kentucky, Nevada, Las Vegas, maybe Auburn. There were several universities that Ray invited to participate in a program. Let's talk about delayed mortality. And I already knew from the experience that I'd personally had. We ran tournaments at the marina that I used to work at when I was 17, 18 years old. We'd run tournaments, and I would put them in a big boat slip that had a wire around it where they couldn't get out. And then the next day, I would go down and weigh the fish and measure them, and I'd tag them. And if you turned that tag number in to me at the marina, I give you a secret lure, a pack of worms this week, a hot spot the next week, whatever, some type of bait. So we were getting tags turned in all throughout the course of the year. And I was trying to collect data to give me a better idea on how fish behavior, we'd release one right by the boat dock, and a week later he'd be caught right there where we released him. We'd release another one, and he'd be 5 miles away 2 days later. It just drove me crazy because the data was all over the board, man. It was hard to put any kind of science behind it, but those fish were still alive. And some of them were 3 months later, some of them 6 months later, and we had tournaments in the winter and the summer, and I didn't see any delayed mortality. I didn't see that. But this organization accused that bass was releasing these fish, and later on they died. Well, I remember at Lake Mead, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, they actually put transmitters in these fish. They would number them, they weigh them, they put a transmitter in them, and they followed them. And to make a long story short, the University of Tennessee or Kentucky, one I'm not sure, on Kentucky Lake, they took a whole bay, a cove, and netted it off where nothing could come in or go out. And a year later, they did the research, and 98 or 97 or 96%, a high percentage, it was in the 90s, of those fish a year later were still thriving. And they took them out and they measured them and checked their weight. And it kind of shot a hole in delayed mortality. So I think the live well is an effective way to keep fish alive. I do think summertime tournaments, there's been a lot of tournaments on some lakes where the water was extremely hot, the fish were caught deep and put in live wells, that the mortality rate was extremely high. So I do think we need to be a good steward, and I think we need to prevent as much mortality, period, whether it's delayed or instantaneous. I think we need to really work. And if I'm a tournament organization, I know Major League Fishing, they release their fish immediately, and that's probably the safest way to do it. But I think bass has an incredible record of setting a precedence for people to release fish. Until bass came along, everybody that I've ever known, when they went fishing, they kept their fish.
Right.
I mean, that's going to be dinner.
Yeah, well, people usually fished back then. It wasn't more of a sport. It was more of a, we're catching a snack type of thing.
Well, I think it was both. I think it was a great sport even then, but it was just expected that you kept your fish.
Right.
And so there's been a lot of criticism for the tournaments, but truthfully, the tournaments have been probably the most revenue for the lakes, for preservation of the future, stocking programs, aquatic control, all the different things involved. Bass has been the ringleader. Clearwater, Ray Scott himself took on some Fortune 500 companies back in the 70s for water pollution. The Clean Water Act has a lot to do with bass fishermen because of Ray. So when you look at catch and release, I think delayed mortality, there's probably some. I think there's fish we all lose, but that happens even when you're fishing for fun. I can't tell you how many times I've hooked a fish in the gill or tongue and that fish is going to die. It's just casualties of of the sport itself. It's going to happen. So I think putting a fish in a live well, if you preserve and take care, aerate, and handle that fish as carefully as you can, I think that is a good plan for catch and release. And I personally, all the data that's been collected points in that direction, that those fish are returned to hopefully bite again, hopefully bite my bait.
That's very well said. All right, moving on to number 2. It's hunting and social media. Is social media helping or hurting the image of hunters and anglers?
Boy, that's a hard question. Social media is sparking a lot of interest. A lot of people find out a lot of great information on hunting locations, find out a lot of great information on fishing, and I think it's a real asset. But I feel that way a lot about the internet and cell phones as a whole. I look at my kids and my grandkids, and we're all, including myself, as hard as I try not to be, we're pretty consumed by that telephone. I don't think that's all that good. And I think that when I was a kid and I was competing on a bass level of national tournaments, man, I'd get frustrated. I'd think this guy cut me off. This guy came in and he fished in my waters, and he knew the only reason he was there is because he knew I'd been successful there. And I was pretty angry. And we all, when those competitive juices are flowing and you're giving 100% to try to accomplish something, and you feel like you've been penalized because of somebody infringing on you, it makes you angry. And I didn't do as good a job. I wish I had a lot of situations to do over, but I reacted. Had I had a social media platform, when I came off the water, I may have very well blasted somebody. And that is unhealthy, because what that does, when you insult somebody, and in their mind, they think they did nothing wrong, and in your mind, you think you've been violated. Now you put a post out there. Now they feel they've been violated. So here we go. We start trading blows. And so all the negativity creates discord. All the negativity hurts the industry. You know, we got companies like General Tire that's supporting fishing. They don't want to get involved in a bunch of drama that this guy's mad at this guy and he's saying this and they're saying that. They want to promote a clean, healthy, wholesome sport where, you know, people are enjoying the sport and going fishing. So all that negativity really hurts your sponsor base. It really takes away, especially from non-addendum sponsors. So I think we all need to bridle our tongue or our fingers on our thumbs. You guys that are so good at it, I do one finger text. Yeah. SaraBeth go, do. You know, I always compare it to somebody can type 100 words a minute. I can type a word in 100 minutes. So my methodology. So it take me a long time. I probably cooled down by the time I got everything said I wanted to, picking one at a time. But you guys that can do it with your thumbs, man, you can go out there and post real quickly something negative and it blows up. So from that standpoint, it really hurts.
Right.
The information that's out there, Bass does an awesome job of telling the story, what bait, what method, area of the lake. I mean, it's a gold mine of information that comes out of a tournament. And that's a good post. Right. And then there's a lot of negativity on the backside for the people that kind of offsets the good. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we all need to stop and think about, you know, bad news spreads fast and people like it. If you post something good, you know, you and I have seen when we do a negative show on Forward Facing Sonar, a negative show on this or that or the other, man, we get lots of views. So many more views. When we talk about the good old days and the great history about Bobby Murray and Bill Dance and Roland and Billy Westmoreland and Ray Scott and Forrest Wood, you know, we just get a casual view. So people like bad news. Yeah, so when you write something bad, it's going to go viral.
Well, I think social media plays a big part into the perception of the sport in general. So, people posting all of these trophy pictures of their bucks, their turkey, whatever their kill might be, or their bass in general, I feel like that pushes a lot of speculation. So, like, if somebody posts a picture of, like, a 6-point, it's a little bit smaller, people are going to think, oh, they have the mentality of if it's brown, it's down, and then that just I feel like it causes a bad stigma to the hunting community in general, because then people start hating on hunters, saying that you just kill anything that moves.
Well, I personally thought in the beginning that the sport of bass fishing's got a lot of vocal people that are really quick to create negative and controversial topics. But then I started reading some posts on the election and the difference between a conservative and a liberal, a Republican and a Democrat. And I just thought that the fishing world was full of negativity. Man, there is a great divide in the difference between a liberal and a conservative. So I don't think fishing is nearly as bad as the political environment. And I wish our country could come together and we all work together and all love America. And I wish our sport could come together and all work together with all the organizations, whether it's Major League Fishing or Bass or whomever it may be. I wish we could all come together and work together and be in unity and build a better sport, just like I wish we could come together and build a better country. So I don't know where it's going to go. People are very divided, and I just wish people would think, when you text that, it's like putting smoke back in a bottle. It can't be done. Mm-hmm. Once that smoke leaves that fire pit, it's gone. Mm-hmm. And once you text that, it don't go away. It's there, and you can't take it back. So I wish people would think before they post.
Yeah, I think there's a huge lack of that in every aspect of social media in general. No matter what the topic is, people just like to fire off stupid comments without even thinking.
Yeah, you're right. And I thought it was kind of, I'm not a social media guy for the most part, mm-hmm. and I don't read a whole lot of stuff that's posted on there. And, Martha, I get negative comments, well, you're a whatever I am. And I agree with you. I'm not the greatest guy in the world. I wish I was better. And thank God for sanctification, I get better. But I got a lot of flaws, and I'm very much aware of that. But when people point those flaws out to me on the internet, Martha gets so mad she's ready to fight.
Oh, I know. She's ruthless. You'll have a novel sent to you in a heartbeat. And you want to talk about somebody typing fast.
But I just say, baby doll, let that ride. Don't worry about it. There are people that are negative. And everything they look at it from a negative perspective. So they're just waiting on you to make a mistake. They're just looking forward till they can find something of fault. And it's just, I guess it's nature for some people. They just never look for the good. They always look for the bad. So you're going to get a lot of criticism. Absolutely. But it is not unique to bass fishing. It is everything on that internet.
Everything. I think people get an ego boost looking for validation from other people in the comments by pointing out somebody else's flaws or bringing somebody else down. I mean, that's just true in humanity in general. We're going to bring down other people to make ourselves look great. So, I mean, that's just humanity in general. There's not really too much you can do about that.
No, but it's not good for our fishing world. We're trying to grow the sport. We're trying to get more outside companies. We'd like to have Coca-Cola, and we'd like to have some of these wholesome American companies involved in our sport. And when you got so much negativity around the sport, those guys don't want to be a part of it.
All right. Well, moving on to question number 4, private versus public land access. So should private landowners be required to allow public access to their waters and woods? Absolutely
not. People work hard and they manage, and it would be an absolute zoo if you allowed the public to enter private waters against your will. Now, there are a lot of people that have private water that invite people to come and fish because they need fish taken out.
Yeah.
And invariably, I got a great friend. He's my business partner, actually. And he's got a lake behind his house. And he tried so hard to be a great neighbor and allow his neighbors to come in and fish. And he said, you just would not believe. They will not pick up their trash. You tell them you take enough fish for you to eat, and you just casually walk down there one afternoon. They got a cooler running over. It would feed 100 people. Mm-hmm. And you just can't police it. And it goes back to human nature, greed. People, boy, I'm catching them. I'm going to keep them all. And it's just so hard. I get criticism on my land, but I'm going to tell you the way the law is. If you give somebody permission to walk down on your land, to go to your pond and go fishing, and they step in a hole and break their ankle, they can sue you. And that happens on a regular basis. If you give someone permission to go down to your pond and fish and they fall in and drown, their family can sue you. Yeah. It's just the way the law is written and the way things are today. When I was a kid, I almost never, ever was told if I wanted to go squirrel hunting, if I wanted to go fishing in their pond. I was almost never told no if I asked permission and I was polite. Mm-hmm. And the way the laws are written and the lawsuits started happening, private landowners just got real paranoid about letting anybody on their land because of the legality behind it all. So you almost can't afford to allow somebody or give somebody permission to be on your land.
Right. Well, that boggles me because I know there were some topics talking about some states going to force some people that own like large pieces of water on their land to force them to where the public can come on there and fish. I'm like, how do you regulate that? Because I'm just thinking too, people who go down there, destroy your land, and then you've got to pay for it. Like if it's not regulated by a city or, the state, however that goes across, like to me, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I know when I went to Montana several years ago, out on the Powder River, Broadus, Montana, to try to finish up my Grand Slam and kill a Merriam turkey, that I hunted with a man that had about 25 miles of land on both sides of a dirt road. Well, about 200 yards on each side of the road was his property line. Well, there were millions of acres that accessed. And let me go back and say there were thousands and thousands of acres that access. But because he controlled the land for 25 miles, that BLM or government land that belonged to we the people, you and I and everyone watching this or listening to this podcast, he controlled it because he would not allow public access. That's a bad deal, and that should not be. So after a few years, the government looked at that, and there were enough people pointing that out and complaining. I think he has to add, and I could be wrong, but it's something close to this anyway. Every 6 miles, he has to allow public access to that BLM land, that government land. Mm-hmm. And so he lost his little sanctuary because all that land, thousands and thousands of acres with elk and mule deer and turkeys and all the great wildlife, he controlled it because he owned that 200-yard strip on both sides of the dirt road. Mm. Now that's not. So I think that's fair. And then about 20 years ago, when George W. Herbert Bush was the president of the United States, Tom Bedell with Berkeley worked really, really hard to get fishing in national parks called Pathways to Fishing. And Berkeley put that together to allow kids to fish in national parks. And there were so many thousands of acres of water in public parks that we didn't have access to. So it was not fair that you're a bird watcher or you just love to go observe wildlife or whatever, and these kids who would love to fish were not allowed to do that, because you couldn't participate in fishing. You can participate in bird watching and wildlife viewing, but not fishing. So with President Bush and Tom Bedell, they opened up pathways to fishing. So I'm going to say thousands and thousands of acres of water was opened up for kids to be able to fish in national parks through Pathway to Fishing. Great program.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, moving on to our next question. What more can be done to encourage women to get involved in fishing, hunting, and the outdoor sports?
You know, that's one thing we're watching happen, and it's exciting for me. There are more and more every year female fishermen and female fishing people. Right. I don't know how you say that correctly, but high school fishing, man, these girls are super successful. And I think we need to make, the water's level.
Yeah.
Don't care if you're short, fat, slow, fat. It doesn't make any difference. You go to high school, and we don't think about this a lot, to be honest. You go to high school and you're a kid and you're infatuated with sports, but you're virtually eliminated from basketball if you're short.
Right.
And you're virtually eliminated from football if you're slow.
Right.
And baseball is much of the same. You got to be able to be coordinated enough to hit the ball and catch the ball. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of peer pressure on entering a sport in school, but it's so important. You learn so much from teams and being involved in competition. It's so healthy. But fishing's level.
It's all inclusive. Includes everybody.
Yeah, you don't have to be tall. You can be fat. You can be short. It don't matter. The water's level. And that fish, when you bring that plastic worm by that stump, that fish don't care if you're a boy or a girl.
Right, exactly.
So it's opened up a lot of opportunity to get more and more females involved in the sport. And we're seeing and reaping rewards from that right now.
Right.
I see now, 25 years ago, I would go down to Lake Murray, which is a lake not far from me. And I'd go fishing on Lake Murray, and I never saw two girls in a bass boat. I can't ever recall seeing that. Now, I'd see a lady fishing with her husband. Most of the time, she's in the back laying out in the sun reading a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now, man, it'll be 5 or 6 or 7 times a year. I'll see two girls up there, man, chunking.
Right.
And they're getting on with it, man. They're all about catching a fish. So that is so refreshing. And I got more granddaughters than I got grandsons. So I'm very partial to promoting sports for my granddaughters. I want it to be good. And so I think that the fact that you can join a fishing team, whether you're a boy or a girl, it makes no difference. It's open to all. Mm-hmm. It's really promoting and recruiting a lot more females into our sport, and that is a positive thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I can list 3 off the top of my head. Macy Watkins, Maggie Williams, Morgan Peoples. People like that have dominated, I feel like, especially on social media first. And I feel like they have inspired a lot of other girls to say, hey, I can do this too. So it's broadened that, especially as a female, seeing other females in the sport. I feel like it definitely inspires a lot more to be able to go into it. There
was a lady named Sugar Ferris, and she started Bass and Gal. And back early on in my life and my career fishing, Sugar Ferris headed up Bass and Gal. And they had so many participants. Well, Jimmy Houston's wife, Chris, I don't know how many times she was Angler of the Year, multiple times. She won so many tournaments. And Jimmy will tell you this in all honesty. Jimmy Houston at one time was Angler of the Year. Jimmy Houston has won multiple tournaments. And he'd tell you right now, out of all of our family, Chris was the better fisherman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she could beat Jimmy on a regular basis. Now, it takes a man that has a lot of humility to admit that, but Jimmy is quick, and he'll tell you right now, Chris was the best fisherman in their family, and Chris was a beautiful lady, and but she was a fishing machine, and I watched her fish, and it was amazing she could chunk that spinnerbait just as good as Jimmy and just as fast and just as accurate. So it's good to see now that that's coming of age and there's more and more girls involved.
Yeah, man, talent doesn't discriminate. Well, moving on to our next question. Is stocking ponds and lakes helping ecosystem or disrupting the natural balance?
Well, stocking is something that the states can be involved in. You can do your own program on your water, but I am really, and I know I'm going to get shot at here, and I know I'm going to have people give me a lot of grief, what I'm fixing to say, but I go to Lake George. Lake George is on the St. Johns River in Florida, and I am so sickening. I get so sick of watching people from other states and even some Floridians put these 10-pound bass in the live well to take home to cut their heads off and fillet. It literally makes me sick to my stomach. And it's a frustrating thing to take that wonderful resource and just, man, take them out of the water just because you can. You have the right under your license. You can keep 5 or 7 or whatever the number is. But there's got to be some self-policing. So I had a friend, and I watched him hold up 2 10-pound bass, or in that neighborhood. They may not have been quite 10 pounds. And he was back in his driveway at home.
Okay.
And he had caught him out of Lake George. And man, I was just so disappointed in him. And I probably, like I'm giving advice not to react on your social media platform when you're angry. I was hard on him, to be honest. And he said, oh, no. We didn't kill him. We put him in the pond on the golf course. Well, wait a minute. You take a 10-pound bass out of Lake George and you put it in a private pond on a golf course, that doesn't help me. That doesn't help the next guy that wants to catch a trophy bass. Man, all you got to do is take a picture of that bass and measure it, and they can make a fiberglass duplicate. I got one on my wall. Right. That fish is still alive. But yet I get the pleasure of having a trophy that's made out of fiberglass. So we don't need to kill our fish. There's no excuse in that. And so to take fish out of a public lake and put them in private water, that does nobody any good. And then for you to take fish out of private water and put in public water, it's against the law. In most states, you can't introduce wildlife. You can't put fish on your own. It has to be regulated through the state. You could disease the whole lake.
Oh, absolutely. I know Florida's having a hard time with the ball pythons. People were releasing their pet snakes, and I mean, they are rampant all over Florida. More lower end of Florida, but
it's crazy. Yeah. You've got iguanas that people have let go. You've got pythons. You've got crocodiles in the Everglades. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. You can't do that. So, no, I don't think that anybody should take on the personal responsibility of trying to introduce fish into public waters. I think it needs to be state regulated. I'm not for big government, but I am for conservation and control. And if you allow just anybody and everybody the right to put whatever fish they wanted to in a lake, it would be chaotic, and you would certainly have a really good chance of destroying that lake.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of people right now that I think go to the extreme, and I can understand them. Moosehead Lake in Maine is an incredible fishery, and it's cold and it's clear, and it's in the northern part of Maine. It's got a lot of trout. Well, they have tournaments every year. Catch all the bass you can and kill them. Let's kill all these bass. And when you go fishing and practice, keep every bass you catch, big, beautiful smallmouth, and let's kill them because they're an invasive species. They've never been in our waters. They were introduced here 20 years ago. They've dominated. They're hurting our trout. I can understand how they feel. I do understand that. But once those fish are there, once they prosper, I think it's our responsibility at that point to accept them and preserve them and take care of the fishery. Boy, these trout fishermen, they will almost fight you if you have a different viewpoint, because it has depleted the trout population. But I hate that. And the controversy, I get some emails from friends of mine in Maine, and they kill bass. Please kill the bass in Moosehead Lake. If you catch a bass and you don't want him, throw him out on the bank. Just don't put him back in the lake alive, because they're destroying our trout fishery. I get it, but I disagree. Once they're there and they've adapted, leave things alone.
Let nature take its course, essentially. Well, that was all the questions that I had for today.
That is all the questions. Man, we're just getting started. Let's stay with that for just a minute and talk about invasive species. When I first started fishing Lake Erie, we'd go to Port Clinton, Ohio, and Lake Erie was, I don't say a muddy lake, but it was always dingy. And sometimes it was just muddy. And here comes the zebra mussels. Now, I'm not a proponent of any invasive species, but there were so much complaints about zebra mussels are going to destroy Lake Erie. And then zebra mussels started showing up everywhere, all throughout the Great Lakes. Wow. And it was going to be the demise and the fall of the Great Lakes. And I think you got to tell it like it is, and you got to be honest. Zebra mussels have been good. The Great Lakes are more prosperous today than they were when I fished 25 years ago, when there were no zebra mussels, or 40 years ago when there were no zebra mussels.
So you're saying they're like a new food source?
They cleaned up the water.
Okay.
They've cleaned up the water. Lake Erie now is clear as a bell. Look at the St. Lawrence Seaway. And then here comes the gobies. Oh, the gobies. That's another invasive species. It came from China. The gobies are just stupid bait fish. They look at a bass, they don't even run and say, "Hey, Mr. Bass." He says, "Hey." He just picks them like strawberries, you know. And so these bass are getting gigantic. It used to take a 3-pound average. Forrest Wood won the first BASS tournament in history with all smallmouth. And it was on the St. Lawrence Seaway in New York. And he had 45 pounds and just a few ounces. So it was a 3-pound average. 3-pound averages won the Canadian Open for years and years and years and years. Well, now that the gobies and the zebra mussels are there, the water's clear, the fish are prospering, they're eating the gobies and they're getting big and fat. Now it takes over a 6-pound average, more than double what it took for years and years and years. So sometimes it works out for the good. Now we can talk about fire ants. Fire ants have taken my world over here in South Carolina. And again, that was an invasive species that didn't get in our waterways but got on our land, and it's responsible for a lot of depredation and problems. So
I know snakeheads too down in Florida too. You know about those?
Snakeheads, I've caught them. I caught them in Washington, D.C. on the Potomac River. First snakehead I ever saw, I caught out of Mattawoman on the Potomac River, and was blown away. They're beautiful fish, and they say they're really good to eat, but they're very invasive. They're a machine. So, and the second day I caught the fish. The first day, the second day, there were some wildlife conservationists for the state of I guess Virginia that were at the boat ramp, and they said, "Hey, have you seen one of these fish?" I said, "Yeah, snakehead. I caught one yesterday." He said, "Well, we're here to advise you. Please do not return them back to the water. You can either keep them or you can kill them, but do not return them to the water alive. We're really working hard to get these things out of the Potomac River."
Oh, wow. And what'd you do?
I don't think that worked out too good. Well, you know, it is never cool to kill something on TV with a hammer. You don't want to be beating a snakehead and the little kids saying, "What is that crazy guy doing? He's evil." So I didn't want to put them in my live well. They're very aggressive. They're like a mudfish, like a bowfin. And they look like a bowfin with rattlesnake skin on them. They're beautiful fish, but I did. So I'm not going to say what I did. I don't know if there's a statute of limitation. I don't know if I violated the rules of the law, but I didn't want to. Hanky's pretty particular with his boat. Hanky don't want no blood in his carpet.
Yeah.
And Hanky ain't going to be beating no fish in the head in that Ranger boat. That ain't going to happen. So I didn't want to put them in a live well. So I don't know what we did with them.
Mm-hmm. You don't remember? You
I don't
recall?
remember. Yeah, that's right. I plead the fifth.
He blacked out.
I plead the fifth.
Your Honor,
yeah.
I don't know.
I don't
remember.
That's good.
That's terrible.
Well, we've got a sweepstakes going on, and it's with Mercury Outboards.
Yes.
Tell everybody who all's involved in that.
That is Jimmy Houston, Bill Dance, and Hank Parker, and you can win a Mercury outboard up to 300 horsepower, valued at $32,000.
And you have to register under Hank Parker in order to win.
That's true. Make sure that you use our link, and that link will be in the description of this podcast episode. It's on our website, hankparker.com. It's on our other website, hpbaits.com, and it's in the bio of all of our social medias.
So you can win. And let me tell you how that whole thing came about. A couple of years ago, boats have gotten more and more expensive, and a couple of years ago, Mercury came out with their four-stroke outboards. And two-strokes have kind of disappeared. And the two-stroke outboards are not nearly as durable as the four-strokes. So a lot of guys out there have boats that are in great shape, but their engine is starting to go downhill. So Mercury came up with a plan, let's repower your boat. So you can take your old two-stroke off, put the new four-stroke on there, you get 15 or 20 years worth of life, so you can revamp your boat by repowering your boat.
Right.
And so that's what this campaign is all about. It's win an outboard to repower your boat for absolutely free. And you can sign up under Bill Dance, but that's going to hurt my feelings. You can sign up under Jimmy Houston, that's going to break my heart. But if you sign up under Hank Parker, I'm going to be very happy, because the way this thing works, it's a competition between Bill, Jimmy, and myself. And whoever signs up the most people to win that free outboard is going to be declared the winner at the Bassmaster Classic.
Number one. And why would you trust two old men that wear sunglasses inside? What are you hiding? I've never understood that.
Not old men, seasoned veterans.
I have never understood that. Every time I've seen them inside at ICAST, Bassmaster Classic, they always have those sunglasses on. I saw a picture of them. It was at, what event were you at? It was the one with the blue jackets.
Oh, at the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I was like, who was that man standing in the middle? Come to find out it was Bill Dance. I'm like, you can't recognize him without his Tennessee hat and his sunglasses. It's like Clark Kent.
He's going to wear that Tennessee hat and them sunglasses, yeah. But you can register under him, but then if you do, I'm going to get a pie in my face. If I lose to Jimmy and Bill, the deal is, in front of all the people at the Bassmaster Classic, they get to come up with a big pie and hit me in the face. Man, I don't want that. So register to win that free outboard under Hank Parker.
Indeed.
Sounds good. And then we talk about Huckleberry apparel. I'll tell you what I got. I got a text. We did a podcast yesterday, and I got a text. You keep talking about this Huckleberry apparel. You're surely slow getting this thing off the ground. You introduced it at the Bassmaster Classic last year in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we expected for that program to be up and running by now. And I'm going to be honest, I did too. But Danny Bennett, who is the owner of Huckleberry Apparel, who is a very smart businessman, said you can't put all this stuff in place. You've got to have a distributor. You've got to have a warehouse. You've got to have all the printing capabilities. You've got to have a computer base that takes all the numbers of each student in every group, and you have to take all these groups state by state. You have to have it organized, and so I didn't really get all that. Now I'm starting to understand it. So I've been talking with the Bass Federation, trying to get them, TBF, trying to get them to allow us to be a part of their organization, because we need access to to all these teams. So if you know somebody that's a high school fishing team, you know a captain or a boat captain, somebody's involved, go to Huckleberry Apparel and click on high school fishing and sign up and refer that to your other schools to sign up. We need more people. It's hard to put the program and get it implemented and get it in place when you only got 500 or 600 schools. We need a couple of thousand schools to get this thing signed up, get all the stuff in place, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. Come spring of next year, we'll have this program up and running. And what it is, it was my idea. By going to all these different schools, every time I'm wanting to teach the fundamentals of bass fishing, how to catch a fish out of impulse, how to entice a fish with certain lures. They can't wait to ask me a question. So at the end is question answer, always, without exception. First question, how do we get sponsors? How do we get funded? How can we get some money? Well, sponsorship, and I explained that, sponsorship is something where you got to get yourself in a position that you have influence on the consumer to make them buy enough product to offset your expenses, or if you don't, you're a liability. So you're not in a position to get a sponsor.
Right.
But a fundraiser. So I went to everybody that I knew in the industry, and I started talking it up. And I will tell you this, Mossy Oak, they want very much to be a part of this program. Mossy Oak was the only company when I laid it out there, said we love it. We want to help these high school fishermen. We think this is a great program, and we want to be there for the future, and we want to help them get there. So Mossy Oak was one company, but we could not work out all the nuts and bolts. And that's where Danny came in. Danny Bennett with Huckleberry Apparel, he said, I'm willing to give them 30% of all the profit. Well, everybody else said, wait a minute, you can't do that because you got all this administrative costs, you got all this stuff, you can't do it. Danny said, I don't care. I'm willing to do that. So when these kids sell a hat, they make $10. When they sell a hoodie, they make $20. So it's a very lucrative program that offers them the opportunity to make enough money and get enough revenue to support their needs for the entire year. So if I can get the Bass Federation on board and we get all this put together, this time next year, high school fishing and the support program through Huckleberry Apparel is going to be rolling wide open.
Awesome.
So that's why it's taken more time than I thought that it would.
Yeah, and I'll say world famous chocolate bars are just not cutting it for the sport. Everything is expensive, but I think that is a great opportunity for a lot of these high school fishing teams, even collegiate fishing teams. I think it's great. Everything is just so expensive, and I think that'll cover a lot of their costs.
Yeah, you said that about world famous chocolate bars. I used that for the template for this program to work. The bands have always been where these fishing teams are. The bands can't use state or county or federal money for the most part, so they have to raise their own funds.
Yeah.
So they started selling chocolate bars. The band's expense is not nearly what the fisherman's expense is. So selling chocolate bars, making $2 every time you sell a candy bar, is not going to be an adequate amount of money to support what they need. So that's why you get Huckleberry involved. You have apparel, top-notch, Class A, fine product.
Right.
And they make a significant amount of money every time they sell an item. You know, they're making 30%. And so you take a $30 hat, they make $10.
Yeah, that's awesome. And all of those links will be in the description below as well. It'll be labeled as Huckleberry Apparel, and then the high school fishing form itself will also be in that link.
We sure appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and we need you to write in these questions that SaraBeth pulls up. She gets those off the internet where people respond and they ask questions. If you've got a topic you'd like for us to discuss, we'd love to do that. And my whole claim to fame on why I started this podcast, when I was 16 years old, actually 14 years old, Blake Honeycutt from Hickory, North Carolina shows up with a Ranger boat. And I was blown away. Ray Scott started in 1968. Ray Scott had a tournament at Beaver Lake, Arkansas, a competition for bass fishing. I got so intrigued in that, and I couldn't get enough. The more information I got, and I remember seeing Blake hold these big strings of fish up at Lake Eufaula, Alabama, and I got so fired up about the sport. So I engaged, and I became very, very, very involved in fishing, and I set my goal, someday I want to be a world champion bass fisherman. I lived that whole dream. And then when I started my television show, I said, I'd like to phase out. If I ever win the Classic the second time, I'll retire and I'll concentrate on television. I've done that. So I've been involved in the fishing industry from its infant stage. I mean, back in the days that you had an 18 horsepower John Atwater outboard at Beaver Lake. I've been there. And so I know the whole story, and I've been involved in it. So I love to tell that story. We got a wonderful history, and it's amazing how it's prospered and how Lou Childers and graphite rods and ball bearing reels and all the things that this sport has evolved through with forward facing sonar, with mapping, with 360, all the things. You know, when I first started, the strongest trolling motor I could find had 30 pounds of thrust, and we thought, wow, this thing's got 30 pounds of thrust. Mm-hmm. I got 115 pounds now, and I mean, you know, come on. Yeah. The growth is so exciting to tell the history of this sport. So that's why I got involved in doing this podcast, because I love to share those stories. I love the personalities and the characters, and I've had Bobby Murray on. I've had Bill Dance, two of the pioneers. I love that. And so if you've got something you say, with all your history, I wish you'd talk about this. Tell us what you know about that. I just spent a day before yesterday at Duke Tackle. 1926 is when they started there in Shreveport, Louisiana. They have made devil horses for next year will be 100 years. The Rogue, all these different baits, and I got to be a part of that. If you've got something you say, okay, if you've got all that history, tell me about this. Tell me about Fred Young and the Big O. Tell me about D. Thomas and the flipping technique. Tell me about whatever you have an interest in. Write us and tell us, hey, I'd like to hear a podcast on this. I'd like to meet this guy. I wish you'd have him as a guest. I wish you'd do this or that or the other. We'll be glad to do that. And that's what I want to do. I want to highlight the good part of this sport. It's a wonderful sport. Fishing is awesome. Organized fishing has done a fantastic job. Family fishing is incredible. I tell people all the time, we always are in a rush to instill values in our children. Don't do drugs. Stay away from this guy. Do not bully. Don't do this. Don't do that. And we try to tell them that on the way to school or when we have just a short period of time. Man, let's go fishing. Let's get them on the riverbank. Let's interact. Let's listen to what's on their heart, and let's share what's on ours. It is the perfect environment to communicate. And it's the perfect place to build a friendship and camaraderie. We got a wonderful sport, and I like to talk about it, and I like to tell the history. So if you've got something that interests you that we haven't talked about that you would like to hear, hey, drop us a line. I'd love to have a topic that you would like to know something about that I do know something about. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say you want to shoot those questions either in the description of the podcast, like down in the comments, sorry,